Well, first of all, thanks to everyone. My father always tells me that he thinks I work too hard. And his logic for that is that he has not seen a person manage to sit in a chair for as long as I do, typing away on a computer. He thinks that's the hardest thing around. So you guys have really worked hard today. So there are two sort of icons that I wanted to start off with. One is the circle of life, and the other is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The Maslow's hierarchy of needs is being invoked by my dean, who's building this pyramid of needs, and at the bottom of it is water and energy. I don't remember what's in the middle, it doesn't really matter. At the top is creative ideas, and so she thinks that the School of Engineering would focus on all of these things, but really we belong at the top on creative ideas. And with some hesitation, I pointed out that those creative ideas are needed to solve the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid because that's where we have the biggest problems. Not coming up with solutions at the top. We have random ideas all the time, right? So that's that. Now, Circle of Life. We started this day with our president telling us about the Columbia World Projects and a vision to have an impact, and perhaps water is one of the things that he would like to develop this around. And I related to him that today's discussion, we are focusing on infrastructure because instead of griping about how life is terrible, we want solutions, and this is one of the pieces around which solutions can be nucleated. What we have done is bitch about life, right? So that's fair, right? So the first comment I want to make on this to the group back is, this is an invitation. If you guys are willing to spend an entire day sitting here, maybe you're willing to spend an entire lifetime working with us, as long as the life holds up, at least. And if we wanted to design a Columbia World project on water on an infrastructure, and you are interested, please do let us know, because there are multiple challenges here. You have to narrow the intellectual domain, you have to choose a place, because one of the things they want to do is have an impact in 3 to 7 years. Frankly, my view is that many of the people at the university think that we can solve all the world's problems by bringing academics from different disciplines together, and I call that banging steeples of excellence. But that's sort of the view, and the reality is that the world, if you look at it, professors are rated only slightly above real estate agents in terms of reliability by society. So we have to think about the fact that we operate in a certain construct, and the group that is assembled here today represents at least some fraction of the real world. And what we would like to do is get your help to define something meaningful, because I don't think we are capable of defining something meaningful in the vacuum that we sit here. So I was very happy to see each of the panelists representing different areas and speaking very effectively to them. It's also sociologically interesting to me always that you can bring people together who may or may not have expertise on any topic. You stick a bunch of questions in front of them, and they're very happy to go at it. The one word that I didn't hear today, which is really interesting to me, is when we attend meetings that genuine water people are at, the first thing that comes up is somebody wants to talk about complexity and complex systems. And they end with, the world is really complex. They mean complicated, not complex, but semantics aside, that's kind of interesting. Today that didn't come up. That means you guys are now ready to actually solve a few problems because you haven't written them off. Now, what did I learn from today? Because what I advertised at the beginning was I wanted to learn something out of the whole thing. I think the first thing that comes out is a reaffirmation that people are data starved. And data here is in a wide sense, it's knowledge starved. People would really like to know what affects what and not waste their time on a whole bunch of information that is really not material to the discussion. That doesn't come out when people say I need data, because there are many data providers. And one of the related things that came up is that maybe there's an opportunity for a private sector data provision solution. This is really tricky because they're not the data collectors. There have been many attempts at data aggregation and synthesis and provision by the private sector. I don't know of too many that have lost it. Some of them became obsolete because the world moved beyond distribution of compact disks, right? So stuff started ending up on the net. So that business model was gone. But frankly, all the business models that I've seen in that have been data provision business models, not information provision business models. The one successful business provision, information system, business, whatever, information provision business model that's out there um, was a fairly large company run by the former mayor of the city of New York. Okay? So if you think about it, it's not water data that we are really trying to provide, it's something in that space that is actually usable. So maybe those of us who are entrepreneurial here, and I'm looking at people who are 20-somethings because I've learned now that this is a different world. The 20-something person is going to become rich by doing good, well before I ever will get rich or do good. So, so having recognized that, I'm appealing to these guys. Hey, this is the space in which you could do something. The second point that I learned is that this idea of mixing financial instruments, the private sector, the public sector, and infrastructure, or other initiatives, this is not something that comes very easily to people. People, when we are posing these questions out, people are struggling with it. But if you think about it, look, what's making all of these people move? It's money, right? So the way this particular set of questions was posed today to you was there was an underlying current of finance. Now, if what Sarina pointed out is, as an NGO, what she worries about is raising the money to actually do something and then monitoring it and communicating it to someone and saying, hey, we actually did this, it's still working, because that's been the typical bane of the NGO. If you look at what Mark's talking about, if these disasters were happening and the public sector had actually figured out a way to solve the problem, your company is out of business. You would not be there. So I think the private role, the individual, the corporation is there, guys. The fact that we are at $11 per capita investment by the federal government, and this is pitiful. There's no point whining about that. We need to just recognize that this is an area where the private sector clearly is going to have to play a role, okay? Whether you like it or not. Now, the question is what that role could be. So in terms of designing a Columbia World project, my thinking is that we actually have to price that into any sort of project or promotion that we come up with. It will have to have who can benefit, what major problem that we are solving, and an acknowledgement that providing water services in a reliable way in the future, dealing with floods and droughts, dealing with climate aspects, that these are big challenges. I don't think we need to sell that. We need to actually zoom down into something that we want to do. It's not something, I find it very difficult to work with large groups in terms of a discussion towards a project. So what I would like to suggest is, this is homework. You're back at school. So think about this, and let's try to have one-on-one meetings or one-on-two meetings so that we can actually think about some way by which I can help the others here to develop something. And then we come back with a Columbia World project to our administration. Our president, I'm informed, is a very good fundraiser. So because that's one of the goals associated with this. But I think that instead of looking at a single fundraiser, because that never works, this has to be something that if we can design an enterprise that is meaningful for the Americas, then there's no shortage of places we can go to for that. So that's what I would like to summarize, the discussion on in broad terms. And then let me open it back up, because each of the tables raised some good points, and then Michelle particularly wanted people to respond to her idea. So you should talk more.
I wanted to comment to some of the insurance comments, particularly FEMA and the dropping of the insurance. I agree. Whether it's a publicly subsidized mortgage that you have, or if it's totally privately held and not backed up by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, that should consist. Because really what's happening is we're transferring the risk that an individual has to the everyday taxpayer throughout. And even worse, we've kind of gotten into this mindset in the US that, oh, I don't need insurance. The federal government will come and bail me out. Well, your coverage, maximum coverage from NFIP on your home for the structure itself, not the contents, is $250,000. So if you're going to get from a handout from the federal government a max of about 30 to 33,000. So we're subsidizing, and yet we're not solving the problem because this person still has a completely totaled house and only has, you know, a little over 10% of the value in hand to try to get back on their feet. That being said, insurance ends up, you know, you mentioned incentivizing better building practices. The issue is insurance usually comes in after the fact. It's the land use and land use practices, the contractors and builders that really have the incentives just to do things fast on the cheap and not always in the correct location. So in like states like Florida, where I grew up in my later years, you know, there's a big incentive for land or contractors and builders to buy a huge tract of land, many acres, develop it with as many housing units on it, and sell it. And once the builder sells it, he's at no risk or obligation, whether it's in a floodplain or not. And it's only then, once the people buy these pieces of land, the insurers get stuck with the risk of how these homes were built and where they're at. So there needs to be obviously public-private there. But remember, though the joke is we never like to write checks, even though that's our business, you know, we end up subsidizing bad building practices that are facilitated by localities and governments at all different levels. And it's something that, as a society, we ultimately all have to work together, whether public or private, to solve.
So let me add a quick anecdote to yours. On the 11th of May, there's the second auction by the state of New York of a bunch of properties that they acquired and paid people full value for all along the coastline after Sandy. Okay? These properties were acquired and they were given full value with the idea that now we'll remove that stock from the risk hazard. The first such auction happened in October. The land basically, got sold for between $300,000 to $500,000 per lot. Another one is on the 11th of May. This is hilarious, right? Because your point is totally on. These guys paid these guys out full value. Now they're going to create a second set of individuals who will get full value. And my reaction is 300,000 is too rich. If it was 30, I would go buy that land too.
Yesterday was World Water Day. I'm sure you all know about it. Perhaps some of you went down to the Oculus by Fulton Street Station, saw that amazing star architecture balloons all the way along there. It was an incredible sight. Hopefully it's still there today. The reason why I'm saying this is that Columbia has always looked at things not just inside the United States, but across the world, across the Americas. UN Water is looking for a home. And one of the things which I would love to do is to see the Columbia Water project edge itself towards UN Water, which is the delivery of water systems around the world, and being able to understand what water resources there are in the world. And that's something I think all of us would agree in this room. We did have Liam Burney here this morning from UN Water, and there is going to be another meeting at the UN at the end of May, which will be to move this forward. And I'm hoping that we might want to consider, over this concept that is put forward by the President of Columbia, how we might edge towards being involved with UN Water.
Betsy Cody. You said that the president, I guess, earlier today said that asked the question, what is the line between scholarship and action? And I think a lot of the things that have been discussed today, actually, when you look at them and dive down deeper, they come down to institutional and governance issues. And so I think scholarship in that area in particular is like, there have been a lot of great ideas floated. And in many cases, there are reasons they haven't been instituted before. I mean, flood insurance we've been working on since the 1940s, I think, is when White first wrote his paper on flood insurance, right? So they really boil down to institutional issues and sometimes legal issues, and more scholarship in how you translate some of these ideas into praxis would be interesting.
I just think it's interesting for the people who are focused on new technologies. One of the comments, the water industry is one of the most loath to adopt new, anything. And perhaps a window for Colombia is to focus on that. But most of I think the point on some of the systems we've seen, do you necessarily rebuild the systems with the same architecture, engineering that you had previously, or do you try and do something new? And it is, in a world focused on innovation, cutting edge technology, it is almost inconceivable of how the water industry remains so insulated from modernity that it's a real challenge. And I think it's a challenge to, it's a frustration for those people who do have innovations, and it's something which we need to, force the industry to experiment more. And perhaps that's something in which Colombia could be a leader.
I wanted to add just a short comment to Manu's idea around building a business model around data. And I don't want to discourage the millennials in the room to go after it and do it. And I'd be very excited to see what comes out of it. But I also think that's really a place where, again, academia and not-for-profits can play a role, because for academia to get access to data, to have access to modeling, developing modeling resources, tends to be easier because you don't have the issue of non-disclosure and proprietary data. And I think a good example for that is, and we're getting involved in this at the moment, is, for example, the Water Institute of the Gulf. They've been heavily involved in developing very amazing data sets and models for resiliency along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana. And they're now at the point where they're saying, well, we've developed all of these amazing resources using a lot of public funding. How can we actually make this available to the private sector? And can we form partnerships to drive resilience that actually involves private sector and other public sector entities? And I think that's, again, maybe the business model in a way becomes not a single entity solving the problem, but more of a partnership model where the data resides with an independent entity, but the private sector can benefit from it and help turn the data into information.
Back to the role of study into action. I do see that there's a lack of translation from academics to certainly to popular culture or something that is consumable and translatable. And I know that there's one person at Columbia who's maybe tasked, I heard, with literally translating science. But that's something I'm interested in. So there are people who do that. And I think we need more of me who are interested in herding the cats, finding the linkages, and making it happen, because that's actually what I'm good at. I'm not good at sticking around in academia forever, so we can team up on this if everybody's willing to get in a sandbox at the same time.
Manu, I wanted to pick up on the herding cats issue, and to the extent that there's a Columbia World project on water, I think we have to find a way to bring together this very fragmented water sector. You and I have chatted a little bit about in this, on the eve of a potential communication to the Trump administration about how to invest in water infrastructure. There simply is no convening, common voice, single message that is going to resonate.
Well, I think this we can totally engage on. We've been trying to do this for a while. We need help and direction as to who to talk to and how to present stuff, because we don't know how to do that necessarily. Also with Patrick, since I got this thing back, I might as well use it. So the thing is this: you're totally right that in terms of academia, to be able to build out data and knowledge systems is the right place for it. The challenge is that what I've seen is we end up with projects that have a life of like 3 years, 5 years at most. So you have an exponential decay in being able to support that capability as soon as that project ends. So we don't have a business model under which this lives. That's the problem. So if you had the initial development done in academia, of the tools to be able to scrape all of this stuff and keep it going, then a millennial can really take off with it. I don't know if you saw, the turn of the century when all the .com millionaires were being born, there was a guy I know who started bigcharts.com. Do you remember this? Did anybody see bigcharts.com? No, right? Okay. What the guy did, all he did, he was from Yale. What he did was that he basically managed to start scraping the Wall Street feeds, the stock feeds that were going on. And he would create little candlestick charts in Excel, and he would push them back out onto the web in near real time. So if you went and clicked and you wanted a particular stock, he would grab what was scraped. It wasn't quite real time, because there was a delay. So these graphs, the very first time they showed up, they looked like crummy Excel graphs. Over a couple of years, they started looking nicer, and they were actually quite nice by that time. Suddenly they disappeared, and my reaction was, hey, wait a minute, what happened? Guess what? Somebody bought him out for $20 million, for not a whole lot of effort that had gone into this particular enterprise. So there is, this was a student at Yale at the time. I don't know if he dropped out. That would be reasonable.
The insurance industry has had models similar to this for property risks and even now some casualty risks for about 30 years now. So they came out of academia, particularly out of Stanford in California. And these models, where it's still in its infancy, are U.S. flood models because, as I mentioned, the private sector hasn't had much interest until recently into insuring flood in the United States. So that could be an avenue. There are companies out there, but particularly on the resiliency, because that's not really what's focused on. If there's ways to adapt or modify these models to help, particularly help impoverished areas or cities understand what their risk is, not just to buildings like this, but to the infrastructure, better information on subways, power transmission and distribution, et cetera, that will be much more useful as a more holistic tool to all aspects of society.
So we were just talking about this earlier. This is a product that I think is globally relevant. It's not just a US thing. And we've had a project with AIG where we started in this direction. They've turned out to be clever individuals. They took all the code we developed and shifted it to India. They're like our second and third year funding.
That's not nice of them.
No.
No wonder you don't like us.
We like you. The thing I think is that there are discrete products that can be developed in academia. That's exactly the point that you're bringing up. But then the deployment of these products is where it's at. And,
Hi, everyone. I should quickly introduce myself. My name is Meena Sankran. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Ketos. We're an emerging technology, and hearing all day about sort of this missing data link is very refreshing because being located in San Jose, somehow part of California is still in denial of the real problem with water. And I was speaking with Mark earlier that in spite of 6 years of drought and 2 months of rain, we have boats now in San Jose with all the flash flood warning. And what Ketos does is we're under 2 years, so we're fairly new. But what we're focused on is really bringing the integration of water with technology in terms of smart connected IoT and data science. Our vision is really to bring that data platform so that every node is able to generate data, whether it's water usage or water quality, on a continuous basis. And so we've built not just a cloud-based management software to just do the analytics of existing data, but we've actually built the device that can do the continuous monitoring so that you can generate that net new data that doesn't exist today. So we're actively pursuing sort of this year being our customer pilots and sort of testing. It'll, future will tell where we land, but we're absolutely excited about the journey. There's a need, and looking forward to collaborating with not just the academics and the R&D community, but also with private sector, other companies, because we want to work where we offer our API to integrate with existing deployments that have already spent that money and nodes existing so that we don't have to recreate that work. How do we integrate that data so that becomes more of a ubiquitous platform? So that's the vision. We hope to get there, and I just wanted to kind of share that with all of you. And I've been, it's an honor to be part of this event, and Upmanu is actually on our scientific advisory panel, so it's been phenomenal getting direction from him. So thank you.
Send us, please, your thoughts and interest in engaging. That's the #1 issue. some of you may not be willing to speak up because you're thinking, this was such a waste of my time. If so, please do write and tell me that too. And maybe you have a suggestion as to how we can find a way to engage you. With that, I don't know that is there a reception thing?
Yeah, it's at Arts and Crafts Beer Parlor.
That's it. See, now you get the beer. So, yeah, okay, time for beer. Thanks, everyone. This was good.